You will often find in Platonic dialogues, where Socrates is usually portrayed as the main character, a certain attempt to get at the root of things, to kind of strike a bullseye of our thought, and to get at the definitions of concepts that they are exploring there in the dialogues. What does Socrates mean by definition? What does he want from his interlocutors? Well, he usually asks for a determination of the essence of a certain concept. And what does he mean by an essence? He means something that is common to all the uses of that concept, or all the instances that fall under that universal, that general concept. So he will often have a problem with people, his interlocutors, offering him ostensive definitions or certain examples of concepts that he is trying to define, because he doesn't think that's good enough. He needs a more exact definition, which will kind of get at the essence of the phenomenon that is trying to be defined. So we have seen that Socrates has a problem with ostensive definitions and definitions by examples, but Wittgenstein might object to that by saying that that's not how ordinary language works. Ordinary language works mostly in terms of ostension and examples. So that is how we usually usually learn concepts when we are small children. For example, we learn by someone showing us, okay, here's a book, or this is a book, or this is right, or whatever other concept or word we are using. So Socrates' attempts may, although they are sort of philosophically admirable, we maybe could accuse him of being guilty of a certain misrepresentation of natural language, because he wants to get at an unchanging and eternal essence of things which may not even be there to find. It may be our invention more than something we find in the world. That's what Wittgenstein may say, or anybody else who is sort of a constructivist about language, and not of an opinion that Plato would later endorse. We will talk about Plato's opinion a little bit later. And now to talk about Plato's opinion as he may plausibly be interpreted. So Plato does not see concepts as merely human creations that are as arbitrary as the will or intentions of their creator. So for him, they are eternal essentialities that exist in intelligible realm independently of particular human minds that might get a hold or grasp of them. So by analyzing our ideas or concepts, we are not merely analyzing our mental apparatus or apparature, but simultaneously analyzing the nature of the world, the nature of reality itself. We own our grasp. We own our grasp and possession of these concepts to a stipulated time where our souls pre-existed in the realm of ideas free of bodily limitations, and that is how Plato explains knowledge, i.e., as recollection, or at least in some of his moods, right? So the Greek word for recollection is anamnesis, but that does not explain how the souls that existed in that heavenly realm, the philosopher's heaven, got to know these ideas if they did not do this in this life, right? So maybe they were eternally planted in their souls or whatever. So let's go on. Wittgenstein probably wouldn't like being interpreted as doing metaphysics or any other type of traditional philosophical work. He probably understood himself as a kind of critic of philosophy as traditionally understood and traditionally done, and he was trying to undo the spell that philosophical language has cast on our minds. Philosophical language, the technical verbiage of philosophy and metaphysics, is not privileged in any way over and above our ordinary language use. In contrast, it would even be a level below. It would even be, it would not, perhaps it would not even be a legitimate use of language. Dearly, Wittgenstein, from the Tractatus, is aligned with what would later become the logical positivist doctrine of saying metaphysics, ethics, and aesthetics as being nonsensical, illegitimate uses of language that we need to get rid of and shake off. So it seems that his philosophical program, Wittgenstein's philosophical program and task, is largely negative or destructive or critical. in that he is trying to show the pointlessness of aimlessly arguing in circles about most traditional philosophical topics where we cannot even get off the ground by agreeing with the meanings of the terms. He wants a restoration of ordinary language and a return to a more natural language use that is more firmly and securely grounded in our actual form of life, as he sees the form of life as the source of our language, and ultimately the legitimating point of those, the legitimate basis of our use of language. The maybe why we often read him as analyzing very rudimentary forms of language use on what he calls language games in the narrower sense. So he wants to bring to light the logic inherent in everyday language, and that is the task of philosophy of language, if there is one, if there is any, and not revising, revolutionizing, idealizing, or formalizing the language as it is usually found and practiced. As long as ordinary language serves our purposes, there is not a need to upgrade on it, and the attempt at an upgrade might likely actually be a downgrade. So language has its own life and trajectory that needs to be followed and not artificially led and directed. We are not to infuse into language our own logic, but to extract it from it as it is. Language is thus the ultimate given. So if we are not to search for traditional definitions of our words and concepts, then what do we do? Well, Wittgenstein introduces the concept of family resemblances, as he calls them. So those are basically the commonalities of the uses of certain words that meanings are grouped around. So we may not be able to get at a unified definition of a certain term, or we can get at this or that use and this or that well, perhaps definition, but meaning, where there are many meanings and no one of those is privileged over the others. So we can ask the question: do all uses of a word have something in common, as Socrates or Plato would want, right? Because we use the same word in all of those cases. Wittgenstein would say, no, don't tell me that we need to find a definition because they all have something in common. He doesn't want to hear that. Well, if not, then the various uses of the same word are just cases of non-homonymy. So, but here's a complication. Right? Now you look at the diagram on the screen. So as you see, x4 is definitely homonymous to x1, x2, and x3. There is no overlap of meaning. So homonyms are words that have the same external appearance, same external linguistic form, but do not have the same meaning. So they probably have the same linguistic form because of some historical coincidence, something like that. But what is the relationship of x2 and x3 to x1 and to each other? Well, they have partially the same meaning as x1 and their own peculiar connotations in addition to that. So they partially mean the same thing as each other and partially diverse, partially different meaning, right? So they're not simply special uses of x1 like x5 and x6 are. Let x be for example, let x be the word man. So let x1 mean rational being and animal. Something like Aristotle would want. So x2 could then mean rational being and God's creation. x3 could mean animal and product of evolution. So x2 and x3 then both pick up aspects of x1's meaning and add their own connotation incompatible with the other. x5 would then mean rational being and x6 could mean just animal. So they add no new connotation to x1 but just pick up parts of it and different ones at that. So x4 would mean something like robot. So if neither an animal or a rational being could be a robot, there's nothing in common between x1 and x4. So same word is used more than once, can have exactly the same meaning, partially the same meaning, or a whole different one. So as we see in this diagram, here are represented all three possible relations between classes, except identity, right? But then there's not two classes, there's just one class. So all the possible relations, which are like inclusion, overlap, partial overlap, complete inclusion, partial overlap, and complete exclusion. So Wittgenstein's shift of focus from propositions to acts of assertion as a proto-pragmaticist replacement of truth with rational assertability. That is a possible interpretation of what Wittgenstein does in his later philosophy. So also connected to this is his understanding of meaning as use. So we could say, is he supplementing the semantics with pragmatics of speech acts? Is he trying to reduce all semantics to pragmatics? Or to say the words have no meaning independent of how they are used? Still, there's some, we could safely say there's some speaker independent, intersubjectively binding rules of language that limit our legitimate uses. So connected to the thesis that language is essentially a social phenomena. So his argument against private language, so not completely subject to the will of a particular individual. So we as users of language are not completely free to determine what is a legitimate use of language and what is not, but language is still not independent of all of us together as language users or certain users of a certain natural language. So that has been it for now. So thanks for listening, and I hope more content like this will be extended in the future.